if you drop senior living, how are people going to know that this is a
Sure.
senior living community? And I remember it, and the thing that I think about is, a resident who's like, John, you took, senior living, that new sign. How people driving down the road aren't going to know what that is. And in my mind, and what we knew what was happening is people who saw senior living said, I don't need a nursing home
Sure.
yet. I'm still good. And we wanted people to pick up the phone after they drove by and say, wow, look at that new sign. Let me Google Meadowood.
Yeah.
Boom. And that was really the goal of the website, was to really understand what are the pages that we were experiencing traffic on the most. What is it that people are searching for? And how can we build out a website and have content on a homepage that keeps them there longer and gets them to a forum so that there's a call to action and we can get them there. And we didn't want to overcomplicate it. We knew that the homepage was a priority. We knew that the careers page was a priority. And then our floor plans and imagery. And we just didn't want to overwhelm people with too much. We wanted it to really feel beautiful.
Welcome to The Move In, a senior living marketing podcast from Unlock Health, a full-service marketing partner for the aging services industry. Join us for candid conversations exploring the latest marketing strategies with the senior living community leaders and innovative solution partners who are moving our industry forward. Together, we'll build a community to build better communities. Have you tried to update your website only to realize it's time to go through a rebrand? Hello, I'm Larry Williams, and welcome to the Move In Senior Living Marketing powered by Unlock Health. Rebranding and website optimization will be the focus of this episode with our guest, John Kotsatos, the VP of Sales and Marketing at Meadowood. What started as a website update during COVID evolved into a full-scale rebrand that touched everything from visuals to culture. John shares how Meadowood honored its rich history while reimagining its future, and how the right questions led to a rebrand that truly reflects its community. Here are a few things we discussed. How this full-scale rebrand included a new logo, color palette, and messaging that better reflected the community's identity and vision. John also shared how Meadowood navigated the delicate balance of updating its image while preserving the rich history and emotional connection that residents and staff had to the original brand, and how the rebrand became more than a marketing effort, but a unifying force for the organization during the uncertainty of COVID, giving staff, residents, and leadership a shared story and a hopeful vision for the future. If you're thinking about a refresh or in the middle of one, this is the conversation you need to hear. Let's jump in. All right, we are back on the move in senior living marketing with John Kotsatos. John, did I say that?
That
Did I
was
handle that correctly?
as good as my uncle could say it. Yeah, it's good,
That's a
Larry.
win. I'll take it. So I've said this many times. I always get nervous with names. I'm afraid I'm going to butcher it, even though I practice. So thank you for making me feel a lot better about that. So real quick, quick background with John. He is the VP of Sales and Marketing of Meadowood. John and I met at Health Tech in 2023. And so, there are different presentations that, like that tend to stay in our memory bank. And John, yours was one of them. And I mentioned to you before, your presentation on that transitioning the Meadowood brand, the website upgrade, getting that really, I'd say not upgraded, but just transitioning it into more of that modern look and feel was really, I don't say eye-opening, but it left me understanding what that process looked like and the challenges, but at the same time, the benefits. And so when Unlike Health was talking about this senior living marketing podcast, I mentioned to you before, you're one of my top people I wanted to check, just to chat with, because I felt like you had so much feedback and so much guidance you can provide others if they're going through the same process. So all that being said, John, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time for this conversation. And but
Thanks
before
for having me, Larry.
yeah, man. And before we go on, get started, tell people more about you, kind of that background, and also about Meadowood, because I think a little bit of history about Meadowood is really important to the rest of this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, so, Meadowood, we're a single site nonprofit. We opened our doors in 1988. So we've been around for quite some time in a part of Pennsylvania where there's a lot of life plan communities all around us. And For me, um, out of college, I only ever worked in senior housing, and I started out in a nursing home in North Philadelphia that only remained open for a few years, but starting out in activities on a memory care unit, which is not what I had expected, but that's just how it happened. And the connection and bond that I experienced in that facility was something that I just didn't expect, and it stayed with me, and it's what has kept me in this industry for that long. And it just feels natural. The community aspect of being with the resident, their families, the staff. That really ties into my upbringing of just you know growing up in a family business and being together, and it just played out really well. And um, you and I have talked about this a lot, but I couldn't imagine myself in anything else because of what this is and what it means to being in a community. And also, I think my connection just and upbringing with my grandparents, there's an element of being with our residents that
Hmm.
is really strong for me, and I love it. And you know, all of this really kicked off, and how we ended up meeting each other at Health Tech had to do with the rebrand, and
Hmm.
it really all kind of came about at a very strange time. And I don't, I think without COVID, I'm not sure how I would have approached it because we're all so busy running, running, running. The idea of a rebrand is huge, and I was still relatively new to Meadowood. Um, but when COVID came around, and all of us started, shutting down our communities and limiting visitors, and just not a lot of activity, especially on the sales and marketing side. You know, we were looking at our website. That was the
Yeah.
front door, and this all really started with, you know, our fitness and wellness director, um, Becky, was coming to me saying, John, we can do better. Our programming that we have here does not really truly reflect what we're seeing, and it's not. It needs to be more real. And I couldn't agree more with what she was saying. And not until COVID hit and we started staring at our website more and more,
Yeah.
because that's just where it was, and we saw traffic going, doubling, tripling because of just COVID and nursing home deaths.
Sure.
And I couldn't stop saying, this is not, we got to do something about that. And this really all started the rebrand with the idea of finding an agency that we were going to be able to work with to build a new website. That's
Yeah.
really how it started.
Hmm.
And we started down that path, and not until they said, would you be interested in exploring a new logo? And I said, no, we can't do that. Not
Yeah.
not right now. I'm not here long enough, and this logo and has been with us for so long,
Mm.
and not until that question came out did I then really begin to look closely and think about what was happening here. A combination of our programming, combination of what people were looking at. I'm like, this is not what's happening here. We can make this feel and look different. And that's kind of how the whole rebrand was born. And it was such a great experience for me learning through all of this and working with an agency that had no experience in senior living. Was
Hmm.
another angle that I think added some new energy, at least for some of us here, because they were asking questions that weren't questions that you would typically maybe want to hear from someone who's going to build out your website or
Sure.
rebrand. You would think that they would know that, but I think part of the success that we had with them was them being curious and
Yeah.
asking the questions. And there's so many different elements that were brought up that made us all question it. And one of the ones that really stood out was dropping senior living
Hmm.
from our logo, from our name.
Yeah.
How are people going to know what you are, and how are we going to present that to the residents? So um, again, this really started through the website and COVID, and really becoming connected with what our history and what our culture here was, and saying we can do better at how people see us. And it was a process that was, again, great for the community, and it allowed me to even bond closer to
Mhm.
the story of Meadowood, and feel very confident as to why it needed to happen. And that was something that needed to be, there needed to be a lot of confidence around why this was happening in order to be able to, you know, talk to our community, our residents, our board members, our staff, leadership, and say,
Mhm.
here's why this is going to be okay.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because that was really a question I have. Just because Metalwood has such a rich and proud history, and then you pull in, coming out of the gate, you said the activities director, correct? Said like it's time for a refresh, and then you were, somewhat on board with this. Was it hard to get others on board in terms of yes, it's one thing for a new website, but then we start talking about logo, we're talking about brand standards. I'm sure at that point there was some selling within the walls of the organization that you had to, really manage a lot of conversations and emotions. And I didn't know like how tough that was.
It was difficult. I mean, it was, there were some individuals who, you know, and I could understand it because there was so much, passion
Hmm.
and love for the community and the culture that, the idea of having a new look, and me kind of at that time, I'm only 3 years in, 2.5 years in at that point during COVID.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was tough for some, and I remember to this day, because we weren't able to have those big meetings and have everybody in the room and show. And one of our board members who was tied to our founders, he's the son of our founders. He was the only one that wasn't at the board of directors meeting, which he was also in the marketing committee. And I remember having to invite him in, with our CEO Paul, to say, we're gonna, here are the options that we're looking at for the logo. And you know, there was a part of me that was like, this is real, in the sense of like, this is what his parents
Yeah.
had envisioned. There's a reason why the brand has went on for so long this way,
Hmm.
and here I am, um, presenting to him why we're going to change it. But the story and the reason for it was so compelling, because we agonized over how we were going to do it, but also understand why we were going to do it. That the story was able to be told in a way that people said, "I understand it,"
Yeah,
for the
for
most
sure.
part. But of course, there's a few that you know will not ever be able to, and you can understand that too.
Sure.
But it was something that, if there's any advice I could give to people who are going through a rebrand, who have a rich history, and it's something that's sensitive, is you really have to believe in it, and
Hmm.
you have to be able to tell the story why. And I sat in the auditorium, I think for 2 days, 4 sessions, and we presented to residents. And that was an interesting experience. But in the end, many residents were very open, and I was surprised at how willing and accepting they were, and understanding they were, because I had my own personal story that connected to why the look was different, but why we were still going to be able to hold on our heritage. It doesn't mean that we're going to
Sure.
lose anything. We're just going to reposition ourselves in the market to be able to stand out more and have more recognition. And we were dealing with workforce too, and we needed to be able to say, hey, this has to also be able to target workforce, dining servers,
Sure.
nurses. We needed to look like we're fresh, we're energized, and we're just going to keep going. And COVID's not going to get in the way. We're going to pull right through this.
Yeah, and one thing I think that you all did very well was not only hang on to that tradition, but in that history, but you celebrated it. And so when you made that transition, you made sure that it reflected to the past as much as it did in the future. And that doesn't come just from your presentation. It's looking at the website now and how you celebrate again that rich history in the history of Meadowood.
Absolutely. I mean, and we do that even with where our, for our sales and marketing offices, are located. We're in our founder's home. This is the story of where
Yeah.
Meadowood started, and that reinforces the commitment that we have to preserving the story,
Mhm.
and allowing that story to be told for everyone who comes onto our campus. Their first experience is walking into a home that allows us to tell the story of how this all started and to show the evolution,
Yeah.
to show how things have, progressed through, and how some things are still part of our culture, like croquet, which is right outside our kind of our founders' home or our offices. We call it the Heritage Center now, but we know that that was something that the family uh, really loved playing, and it's right outside that of our home now. Our residents play it, every morning. So it's awesome because people will pull up onto campus, and now that the weather's starting to turn, it's beautiful outside, and they're parking to come learn about Meadowood. They're seeing 4 or 5 residents
Mhm.
playing croquet, then they're
Yes.
walking in to a home and they're saying, what's the story here?
Yeah.
So it's a completely different way of opening up the conversation to people who are looking to make a change,
Mhm.
into a huge change into a
Yeah.
community, that doesn't start off by what brings you here. It's more like them asking, why is this mosaic tile blue when I walk in here?
Yeah.
What's the story behind that wall?
Uh, and one thing I appreciate early into this conversation, before we actually hit the record button, you said something that was very impactful, and I think it needs to be shared, which is it's all about the stories. And I think one story, as you were mentioning about the croquet, is when someone drives up, there's activities, there's life, there's energy, and I think that it goes back to that rebranding, which from one logo, if I remember right, has the bird,
Goose.
kind of it's a
Yeah.
goose. Okay. And
Yeah.
then the future one is more of looking at a scenery, that you're incorporating the land and everything. And I think just some of that energy is definitely reflected into the logo. But I have one quick question for you. When I think about what you said about the website, starting with the website, we need to, revamp the website. I'm curious about this. Like initially, I'm guessing that you wanted to, revamp the website, and there was probably a time frame on that. But then, as you started to unpack it, then it took it back to the logo. How did all that, I'd say affect one another? Because I imagine that website quickly took a back seat to the logo because you had to get that squared away, then the brand standards, and then the website. And I was
Mhm.
just curious about timing and something else. If you have any feedback to others, because I just with my experience, it's always yes, we need to optimize the website, but we need lead generation. We
Mhm.
love to also include these new stories and a brand refresh, and sometimes it feels like like you're trying to boil the ocean. And I was going want to get your advice, your feedback about this process, and any advice you can give others who are trying to manage some of these steps.
Yeah, timing wise, it's an interesting, now looking back and thinking about this, because when we were so focused on the website and developing a new website that we wanted to really, invest in and say we want this to really stand out. One of the first things that we did, even before we brought on another agency to help us out with this, is we, again, during COVID, we hired a photographer, who was local, who was no longer working. We found him online, and we basically said, "Are you interested in signing an agreement where we're just going to have you freelance, tell your story?" He was a editorial, beautiful photographer, local, and we connected with him. And again, this goes into back to partnerships and how things evolve and happen. But he came on and he began to come in as a freelance photographer without any art direction and just started
Oh,
shooting.
wow.
And a lot of the images that you see on our website today are those images that he captured. And, the more we started talking and interacting with people outside of, the traditional, maybe senior living um, marketing kind of scope of how things go, people were saying, hey, I didn't think, we'd have these people say, I didn't think it was like this. And I didn't, why don't you guys do this? And then, we started partnering with, or talking to marketing folks outside and saying, yeah, what's going on and how are you guys doing that? And once we committed to saying, we're going to change the website, we're going to rebrand, that timing, it's funny. At one point, I remember saying, our CEO was like, it's got to launch, John. At this point, like, because I wanted it to be perfect, but I
Sure.
realized that there were still going to be some things that we were going to have to go back. But gosh, I'd say that from the time that Exhilarate was our marketing
Mhm.
partner and is still today, and they do a terrific job. They spent a good amount of time with discovery up front,
Mhm.
and that's really where we got a lot of even better data metrics to say, hey, the homepage is really the page that we need to focus on. We can, put a lot of content and visuals that will keep people there and then want them to get them to be able to click. Because we tried too hard in the past with our websites to explain what a life plan community is, how contracts work, how pricing, and it was just so overwhelming that I think we'd lose people. The goal was really to create something that looked like Meadowood, made
Sure.
people feel good when they would get to the site and want to call us or click and fill out a form to schedule a visit. And discovery was a big part of that during COVID, and we had some precautions. So I want to say 12 months in full is what it took. I mean, we were talking to
Yeah.
some agencies that
Is
were
that
saying,
both for logo and website
yeah,
or Oh,
yeah,
wow, that's great.
yeah.
And
Um,
real quick, along with that, did you change the brand colors as well, the color palettes?
we did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man,
The whole thing changed. Yeah. And then, no, then you start thinking about signage and,
yes. You don't
my
realize where your
Lord,
logo is until you go through a
you
rebrand, and then
definitely
you
do
find it
not.
everywhere.
It's like the black lab dog hair. It's gonna always be with you. As you can travel to California on vacation. If you have black lab, that hair is gonna find its way
Yes,
there.
for sure.
It's still with us, and it's okay. And that's the thing. That's the other thing. It's there's the goose is right there because it's part of our story. It's part
Sure.
of the history. There's a reason why we have it. It's still going to be here. It's not going to go away. But we know that the logo today reflects a lot of what people think of
Mhm.
when they think of our community, and a lot of it has to do with just our campus.
Yeah.
We're spread out 140 acres. We're built around walking paths and the outdoors and big trees. And that's part of what our heritage is and our story is. And that's why people love Meadowood, is because of the peacefulness that we have here. And the logo now has a connection to the name. And the goose, while close with us, and we know what that meant. Lessons from the geese. If you ever get a chance, you'll see it on YouTube. But it talks about the formation that geese fly in, and our founders had that vision of, working together when one goose. And I hope I'm not butchering this up. I should probably know this much better, but in essence, the geese fly in a V formation. If one ever gets tired, needs to go down and rest, it always goes down with someone else.
Hmm.
There's always, so the goose is really representative of working together, teamwork, and that
Yeah.
was a big part of our founders, vision, and along with the three-legged stool, which I know a lot of organizations have that too. But what we knew, what we needed to do was speak to more people today, and we needed to clean up, brighten up, and modify this. And it's funny because now thinking back, they gave us like versions of the goose logo that was modernized.
Yeah.
And it's funny. It's like it just didn't feel like it was the right thing to do to the logo. And
Sure.
when we started seeing different versions of a completely different logo, it's like I had to go alone and hide somewhere and turn on the computer and look at these before, so that no one would come in to see what was happening.
Yeah.
It was that intense.
I bet. Yeah, I can see how it would be intense. There's a lot of emotions there, and
Oh
as
yeah.
you're saying all this, I was thinking you sent me some information about that brand transformation and the different logos, and I'm sure, like you said, starting off, you start off with the goose. I'm sure that was a big focal point, but then realizing, yeah, I'm sure at some point you felt like, well, we're trying to make this work instead of it naturally going where it needs to go. But I'm guessing that was a hurdle within itself, was getting away from that imagery.
It was. I mean, it was. But in the end, what we landed on really was just perfect
Yeah.
in being able to illustrate the meadow, the blue sky, the walking
Mm.
paths. I mean, that to me really hit the mark. And looking back and seeing some of the other versions that we had and how we got to those, it's fascinating. And you know what? I don't know that much AI. AI too. Thinking back, I don't know how much that played into it. I mean, I don't really know exactly, but I'd be curious today if it would have been any different because of that, which is
Yeah.
kind of
It'd be
interesting.
interesting to take that information back to the AI and see
Yeah.
what it comes up with. Just see how
What would you have
close.
done? Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I've never thought about using AI for the past, but that would be just to compare to what it is now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
thank you for explaining the process with the logo and updating that. Now, next phase is the color palette, and how did that process go? Where was it drastic changes? I didn't think it was, but I feel like it's subtle.
I
But
mean,
you're also modernizing it just a little bit and maybe brightening it up a little bit.
and that was exactly it, Larry. It was
Okay.
brightened up. We wanted to make it feel a little bit more energetic, more positive. And I remember, with the agency, we were looking at color definitions, like what the colors, how they're
Mhm.
defined and what they mean. And um, that process I thought was great. I think the palette that we looked at, we also looked at what our competitors' palettes were
Mm,
in the market, within our, 10-mile PMA, to get a sense of how do we, separate a little bit more from
sure.
those. So it was a great exercise because we saw the existing palette up against proposed palette up against our existing competitors' palettes.
Yeah.
And it almost like was like, yeah, let's go for it. This looks great.
So I guess there was some type of audit process you went into of going through all these steps.
All
Do
part
you
of
have
the
any
discovery.
recommendations on like what worked, what didn't, or anything you would change on that front as you went through that process?
Oh boy. It's hard to think about. I have to think about that as to what worked really well or what didn't. But COVID was just such a wrench in this too. It makes me think what would have been differently. But because we had that, I felt like we were able to be more personal
Sure.
the process because everything changed. So the
Yeah.
way in which we were, you know, conducting typical, discovery market research shifted. Agencies where people were in their basements,
Mhm.
and we weren't able to have big, large focus groups. It was very personal, and I
Yeah.
think that might have been to our advantage during that
Mhm.
time of trying to rebrand during kind of a COVID shutdown.
Yeah, it's funny. We uh, in the senior living marketing, we talk about that triggering events. At that point where people reach out because there was that one thing that was noticed by a family member, or if maybe someone fell or something happened. I feel like this was a triggering event for you and your marketing team of, okay, well, this is the time we need to make action. We need to take action at this point.
And I think, to your earlier question too, I think that's why um, convincing or, speaking to, other, leadership team members and such, like there was no set kind of path as to what we be doing next. We were just trying to figure out how to deal
Sure.
with next precautions and what do we do in these
Yeah.
cases. And I'm like, here comes John Marketing. Go, hey guys, how do you feel about a rebrand?
Yeah, you're
What?
trying to keep everyone
Yeah,
safe, answering calls from family members, and it's like, "Is this green? Should we drop it just a little bit?" Like, I'm
yeah.
sure that was a tough process for you going
It
through,
was, but it also gave people like some hope. I think
Absolutely. Yes,
it
might have been a
energized.
distraction a little bit.
People would love. I'd have the big screen on the wall, Larry, and I'd have
Mhm.
the next set of proofs that would come through for something that hey, here's a new logo application for all of our signage, and
Yeah.
they'd come in and hey, which one do you like, A, B, C, and before you know it, they'd sit down and they'd start talking, and then another finance person would come in, then HR, and it really allowed us to kind of move forward.
Yeah.
Think about forward at a time where we were not sure about what was going to happen.
Yeah,
You know,
it's makes me think about a book that Amy Camo wrote. She was is a healthcare marketer in Atlanta, and she wrote a book called "Every Storm Runs Out of Rain." And it's really her daily journal entries going through COVID. And it's funny going back to that process and reading that book, you realize like how tense that was. And within marketing, you're setting up communication channels. You're setting up ways that family members can connect with others and everything like that. But I think about that book, Every Storm Runs Out of Rain. Through that time, we couldn't see an end in sight. But I'm sure going through this process gave people like, okay, this is like you said, the future. This is what's going forward. And this is not going to be forever. And there
right.
is, I mean, honestly, I think about your logo. Like there
Yeah.
is a brighter future ahead of us. And I'm sure that was very rewarding and uplifting, just that process within itself.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Well,
It was a great experience. I'm so glad that I kind of had the opportunity to go through that.
that's incredible. So I'm going to transition us from the we got the logo, then you have the color palette. Now it's back to the original starting point, which is the website. Uh, think going back to that process, like what was the overreaching goals for the website? I know you want to tell that story, but I'm guessing going through those transitional shifts, going through, with COVID and everything, I'm guessing you really want to connect the dots with sales and marketing, and that gave you a chance to really take a different look at that and structure a website that's not only going to tell that story, but going to be performance driven as well. And am I on the right page? And can you kind of give us more, clarity of making that transition at that point?
Yeah, for me, and I think the thing that our agency, picked up on is that there's just so much content on the existing site that we were just trying too hard to explain to someone who we knew with the data that we were getting, they're spending, a minute, 20 some seconds, a minute, 30 seconds on our website. And what do we want people to be able to capture in that average time that we know people are on our site? And the one thing that I kept hearing over and over is we wanted one to be able to have beautiful visuals and video. So have people come to a page where they felt like it was somewhere. And if you look at the tagline that loads up on the website, imagine yourself living here. We wanted people to be able to land there and feel calm, relaxed, and see something beautiful. Say, wow, is that a CCRC?
Hmm.
And we wanted the second thing too is so we felt we had a great opportunity to get real authentic images, right? So we wanted to really try and focus on that, and then we wanted to have what I kept hearing over and over is breathing room on the website. Allow people to come to the website and not be overwhelmed with content, but be able to have them get to the site and get a sense of and easily navigate what it is that they want. They want to see a floor plan, click, the
Sure.
navigation, the user experience needed to be simplified. We had too much. And between visuals, breathing room, and user experience, we felt that those three things really needed to be at the top. And also, we needed to look at, SEO and what is the stuff that we need to still include. And I remember just, and again, a lot of this too for me is learning, and what are the pages that we were experiencing traffic on the most? What is it that people are searching for? And how can we build out a website and have content on a homepage that keeps them there longer and gets them to a forum so that there's a call to action and we can get them there. And we didn't want to overcomplicate it. We knew that the homepage was a priority. We knew that the careers page was a priority. Um, and then our floor plans and imagery. And we just didn't want to overwhelm people with too much. We wanted it to really feel beautiful.
Yeah, it's almost like at times we have so much information we want to share, but honestly, like with Meadowood, you just almost try to get rid of some of that noise and let the community tell its own story.
And that's exactly it. And that a lot of this too, the copy that we wanted to have in our website, we really wanted to focus on the campus, the acreage, our culture, and then our heritage. We're very proud of that, and that we wanted that to really stand out. But we also knew that we needed to appeal and target to that first time visitor
Yeah, for sure.
and make sure that what they're looking for is not going to get lost in this beautiful, that they're going to get to see a one bedroom floor plan
Yeah. And
without having to search through all this stuff.
like you said, it's about that user experience, that user journey, and that hook is the community. It's the grounds, it's the property, and then at that point, you just create that. It's really breadcrumbs to the other places you want them to go, but it's really what that hook is. And you and your marketing partner, and I appreciate you saying marketing partner, and I think that's that's one of the best ways to describe someone you're working with, which is partner. So kudos to them in working with you through this process and asking tough questions and
Mhm.
kind of leading along the way. So appreciate you saying that and really expressing that teamwork. Two more questions, and I'll leave you alone. So is there any ways or metrics you're looking to define success going through this?
Um, Going through the process at that time or today?
I'd say yes, both. Like, which is, was there anything that was kind of that North Star on like, hey, this means this will be successful in the process? And also, what was the future, goal? Did you have any future goals going through this? Because I know that was a time of a lot of unknowns, and you're going through this process, which has a lot of unknowns. I'm just curious to see if you had anything that any goals of, like where you were hoping this was going to lead. Of course, you always want to say more residents, more clicks, more calls. I just didn't know if
Right.
there are any other metrics or anything
Yeah.
that you're gauging along the way. And maybe, how did that change over time?
Yeah. I mean, so it's a great question because obviously those metrics that you mentioned are important. Um, One of the things that I kept telling myself over and over is that I didn't want to just check the box to say that we got the website done and the rebrand was done so I can move on to the next thing that we
Hmm.
were dealing with, whether it was master plan, growth, whatever it was.
Yeah.
I wanted to treat this as something that I was going to be extremely proud of at the end
Yeah.
and something that I would love.
That's great. I
As
love that.
simple as that. I wanted to do that, and I felt I was able to do that because I had the confidence of my peers in
Hmm.
leadership and also residents, even though and some families that even though they questioned the timing and, not knowing everything that the digital world now does for us. It was important that key people, residents who were with us for a long time and families, um, were going to be able to be honest and transparent. And for the most part, they were very understanding and understood the direction and really liked the story as to why we landed on that. But I also, it was important that those that weren't, maybe, that was going to be transparent too, that we were going to still be able to talk about it without there being hard feelings, but for us to be straight on front. And those things were very important, in me under me knowing that this was going to be something that was going to be successful. Is But again, it goes back to just not checking the box. It needed to be something that I wanted to make sure that I was proud of for Meadowood.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's great advice in all marketing initiatives. It's so easy just to check the box. All right, we did it. There's so much, like we were talking about earlier, so much noise and so easy to just check the box. All right, social media, got it covered. Check the box. Updated the website. Okay, we got it. But to say I want to be proud of that, and going through like helping clients go through rebrands, and you get to the point where it's almost like we just got to get this over with. And my advice is always slow down, just because you're going to be staring this for years to come. You
Exactly.
want to look at it with pride and not saying, I wish I would have. I
Exactly.
just don't like it. It will plague you because you've invested so much time and effort already.
Yeah.
Wrap it up with confidence and know that you gave it your 100%. So thank you for those two,
Yeah.
like notes of don't check the box, never check the box. And also, it's worth it to take pride and finish up with a smile on your face, knowing that you gave it your very best. You're proud of the work you've accomplished.
100%. And Larry, for those who might be going down this path at some point with a rebrand and even a logo change, something that I remember doing too during that time, because to your point, I knew I was going to be looking at this for a long time, and I wanted to make sure that um, what people were looking at was going to be something that they were going to be able to identify. That they were going to be able to see it and say, okay, yes, that's a goose, that's a path, that's a round circle. I carried it with me in my wallet, and I would be at a Wawa gas station getting a haircut. I might get into a conversation with somebody, say, hey, do you have a second? Can I show you something? And I'd just pull it out and I'd show it to them. I said, can you tell me what this is? And I'd show them just the symbol.
Yeah.
What does that look like to you? And it was amazing how people who have no idea who I am, what I do, when they would look at that, and to me too, that helped reinforce that people could see it, and also could see it and say, wow, that looks like a sky. And it gave them that kind of like, oh, I'm outside.
Yeah.
And it really helped add to what we needed to do to make the community, the culture, the residents feel right about the logo. I didn't want it to be
Yeah.
this thing that no one could be able to tell what it was. It was really important for that reason. So
Man,
yeah.
thank you for sharing that. It reminds me of a quote from my friend Julie Plumber, and she said, "A brand is not a logo; it's a promise." And
I like
it's the
that.
most meaningful thing when you think about, as you go through that rebrand. A brand is not a logo; it's a promise, and it's just like you said. That's when you show it to current residents, when you show it to others in the community. You think about the bigger picture, which is, Meadowood, that the resident, it's their history. It's a something they're a part of as well, something they hold dear. And so just to have that buy-in and show that better way, that future forward, it's kudos to you and your team for taking those steps. Now thinking about looking, I say not thinking about, looking back and knowing what you know now. What's your
Mhm.
advice to others who are thinking about a brand refresh or going down the same path?
Um, my advice would be to be comfortable getting uncomfortable,
That's great advice.
um, and actually look for partners that are skilled but might make you feel uncomfortable.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's a lot of what I felt in the beginning, and I'm glad I was able to do that, because I'd be in the car ride home thinking, oh boy, why did he ask me that? Why are they talking about this? But that was how we got to where we got, because the alternative is to just remain um, in being comfortable and just doing something that's safe, which is not wrong, but um, going through that process connects you so much more, and the partners that you develop in this journey of doing that, it bonds them to it too.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Um,
because it's their story as well.
yeah,
Something they're
so
proud of.
let that uncomfortable feeling be around, because it allowed there to be this true, authentic, creative, meaningful experience come through, and I'm so happy that it went that way. So that's my advice: is be uncomfortable as much
That's
as you
awesome.
can. Yeah,
Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time. I've
yeah,
enjoyed this. It was fun to, again, think about that presentation that you had at Health Tech and be able to ask you some of the questions I wanted to ask you probably at that moment. So thank you for taking time for this and really, educating and encouraging, the audience on some of these best practices. Where can people find you if they want to get to know you better or learn more about you?
yeah. So meadowood.net is our website. So anyone wants to jump on there, they could reach out and contact me, or even on my LinkedIn. If they
Yeah.
look up John Kotsatos, I don't think there's too many of those. There is one other one. We have the same name. Our fathers, we loved our grandfather so much, they named us both John Kotsatos, and we're both from the same town. And but I don't think he's on LinkedIn. So John Kotsatos, you can find me, and or even my email at jkotsatos@mwood.org.
That's great.
Yeah.
Man, hey, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll see you at a future event.
All right. Yeah. Looking forward to it, Larry. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you. Great stuff, John. After that conversation, I'm sure everyone can see why I was so excited to have you join us and detail your journey through this rebrand and website optimization. Here are a few notes I took during this conversation. First, start small, but stay open to big change. A website refresh might uncover deeper brand misalignment. Use it to reevaluate how your community is perceived and be willing to expand the scope if it leads to a more authentic story. Second, involve your community early and often. Whether it's staff, residents, or board members, bring key stakeholders into the rebranding journey. Sharing the why behind your decisions builds trust and helps preserve the emotional connection to your legacy. And third, simplify the experience, amplify the story. Your website and branding shouldn't try to explain everything. It should evoke feelings, spark curiosity, and guide people to take the next step. Focus on visuals, clarity, and ease of use to let your community's story shine. Thanks again to John for sharing with us today. And until next time, let's go make some meaningful connections.